What's going on, everybody? It is Monday, September the 13th, and that means it's time for my News Radar. So we're getting closer and closer to the full unveiling of Google's upcoming Pixel 6 and Pixel 6 Pro devices, and a lot of the intrigue around these devices does seem to center around the new Tensor system on a chip, the processor, if you will, of these upcoming devices, partially because, or maybe completely because, this thing is being co-designed basically by Google, customized pretty heavily based off an already existing set of parts maybe, but customized pretty heavily to kind of do specific jobs that Google wants done in their new Pixel 6 devices. So rather than just buying a part off the shelf and rolling with it, they're targeting certain things like AI, computational photography, so forth and so on. And when it comes to the Google Tensor chip, there are about an infinite number of rumors pointing in an infinite number of directions. So we're going to try and kind of sift through them here a bit and see if we can suss out which ones might be more true than others, what details are real. So the first leak we've got here comes from a Twitter user named Digital Chat Station. He posts a lot of leaks on Twitter, and what he pulled out here, and he's not giving great detail about where he got this information, so pinch of salt as usual. But what he's pointed out here is rather strange, and we can kind of back it up with some more information later. So the Google self-developed chip has 2 cores at 2.8 gigahertz, 2 cores at 2.25, and 4 cores at 1.8, a Mali G78 GPU. So what's really odd about this is that first bit of information here. 2 cores at 2.8 gigahertz, because that's going to be our X1 super cores. Those are effectively your peak performance cores. When these things are going full bore, those are the 2 cores that are really going to do most of the heavy lifting. Now, in most systems on a chip, like he mentions here, the Snapdragon 888, the Exynos 2100, they only have 1 X1 core. So it'll be 1, 3, 4 to get 8 total cores. 1 X1 core, 3 secondary performance cores, and then 4 power saving cores that will run background tasks. Looks as though Tensor could have 2 X1 cores, 2 performance cores, and 4 power saving cores. A pretty interesting design. It's something that we're not seeing from anyone else. And on paper, this could mean that peak performance on Tensor actually would be very good. But we're not done there, because Geekbench has some stuff going on too. So let's jump over to Geekbench, and you're going to see a score that doesn't really make sense here. So the Geekbench score here, 414 single core and 2074 multi-core, is not good. That's like Pixel 3 level, okay? And this is running Android 12. It says Google Pixel 6 Pro. It says 2 cores at 2.8, 2 cores at 2.25, 4 cores at 1.8. And guess what? That does line up exactly with what we're seeing here before. But yeah, the scores are very low. Now let's pump the brakes here. Geekbench scores they're not the end all be all. Real world performance is not the same as Geekbench scores, but it's a decent enough sort of metric to gauge expectations on a little bit. That being said, on paper, this thing should be scoring way better than this. So it's possible that this is real, but the Pixel 6 is not being pushed all the way up in some way. It's not fully optimized yet. There's something going on that's accounting for these low scores. Perhaps they're testing more for stability under partial load. They've not pushed it all the way yet. So when you see this score, if you panic and go, oh my God, it's going to be like a Pixel 3 being sold for $1,400, don't worry. These scores are going to go way, way, way up from there. This is a very early score, more than likely, if it's real at all. And it might be real. Max Weinbach here, who's another journalist in the Android world, he says he believes it is real. Despite the fact that Kyle Bradshaw here, who I believe works for 9 to 5 Google, yes, that is correct, he said that 2 leaks going around were fake, but I don't actually think that's correct. So the first one he said was fake was this one, and the easiest way to say it is just because the name of the CPU is an ARM Qualcomm, and that should not be what it should say. The cores aren't correct either. So this one here probably is fake. He also thought that the one that we're looking at here that seems to have the same core cluster was also fake, even though he thought it was more compelling, because of the fact that it shows the same processor ID as the S21, which would not be correct. However, he does later tweet that he's not as sure if it's fake or not, because for some reason Exynos G996B and Snapdragon 888 show the same processor ID in Geekbench. So, very long-winded way to get back around to a wrap-up here. This information is probably early and it's probably much lower than it's going to actually be. This is the core cluster that we are hearing is true. So this is like half accurate and half not accurate. It's going to be really interesting to see as we move forward exactly what the Pixel 6 and Pixel 6 Pro look like in terms of performance, but let's just assume the performance is probably going to be just fine. It's not like anyone's putting out modern smartphones that are slow and laggy in terms of hardware performance at this point, but pretty interesting nonetheless. In news story number 2, this is something that kind of surprised me quite a bit, and I was really pleased just to see. Super interesting story, and there's a full video talking about this by Mr. Mobile that I will link down below because it's really good. What it is that TCL actually had made a Z Flip 3 competitor, which I think actually looks pretty good, that they have sadly canceled because it didn't quite meet their own expectations internally. So what we've got here is something called the TCL Chicago concept. And as you can see here, it looks very much like the Z Flip 3. Looking from the outside here, you can see a double camera here. You can see a cover display. You can see that it is wider than the Z Flip 3, so it's going to have a more standard width smartphone aspect ratio, but overall it looks very similar. Rather than using an ultra thin glass, they are using, I think it's some kind of a plastic, so the stress fracturing thing probably wouldn't have been an issue here. And they were hoping to sell this thing for somewhere under $1,000, maybe as low as $800 to compete with Samsung. But apparently somewhere in development, they just didn't think that it was quite good enough, so they canned the thing. Some other things we know about it is that it wasn't water resistant like the Z Flip 3, probably not as sturdy. It was using the Snapdragon 765 instead of the 888, which is in the Z Flip 3, so maybe battery life would have been better, performance would have been a little bit worse. The 5G it had was a slower version of 5G, although I couldn't care less. It would have been sold only in this one pastel gold color, but sadly, like I said, this thing was canceled before Samsung actually showed off the Z Flip 3, although the Z Flip 3, as they mentioned here, probably did solidify that decision. But TCL is still working on a foldable device. This article here from CNET does say that it's probably going to be another clamshell style device, and they're going to again try to undercut the Z Flip 3, although sadly it's not going to happen this year. Initially they did plan to release a foldable phone in 2021, but it doesn't appear that's going to happen now as this prototype has been canned, which does suck to see, but I still think it's really cool that a company like TCL is trying to enter the foldable phone market and give us another option, because right now, look, it's Samsung, it's Xiaomi, it's Huawei, and it's effectively nobody else. And I think TCL, a company who actually had briefly revived the BlackBerry brand, I actually like their hardware quite a bit. I think that they're actually positioned fairly well to be able to do this. They're a much bigger, much more powerful company than people realize that they are. And don't forget that TCL actually showed off several folding and rollable concepts just a year ago. A triple fold there, a rolling device. So we know that, this is something that they've been working on for a little while. It just means we're going to have to wait a little bit longer than we were hoping. What's the sweet spot for you guys? The Z Flip is closer to $1,000, $800, $750. At what point do you say, man, I'm going to get me a folding phone and give it a shot? Let me know in the comments down below. And I want to wrap up this news radar with a follow-up on a story that I posted yesterday, talking about how I thought, wild speculation that the last big rumor about Surface Duo 2's screen could perhaps be that the actual screens themselves would wrap around the hinge, thereby shrinking the gap between the two screens, so that if you spanned something, it would look more uninterrupted. And what I want to do is I want to kind of corroborate this a little bit, because several of you have commented, hey, there actually were patents in this direction. Some of them are really old. So this is not something, while it is wild speculation, I have no source on this information. What I do have is old patents and the fact that I know that they were working on this type of thing in the past. So let's look at this old article from Windows Central here. Notice this is from 2018. Look at this render here. What does that look like to you? So this is a patent from Microsoft. This is clearly Surface Duo. And what they were working on here was having two screens with a bit of screen literally wrapping into the middle to create a somewhat uninterrupted space with no gap basically between the two screens. And you can see here the render that they came up with here on this article. And that's, guys, if you want to know what I'm picturing in my head, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what I'm talking about. Where you would effectively just have the screen going into the crease, making it look far more uninterrupted. And honestly, theoretically, would this be as good as just having one big tablet screen? No, it's never going to be as good as having one big tablet screen. But would it be a whole heck of a lot better than trying to span something across these two with a hinge visible in the middle? Yeah, I would imagine it would be quite a bit better than that. Now, I don't know why Microsoft did not just do this to begin with Surface Duo. Maybe the tech in some way was not quite ready yet. I don't know why this didn't happen, but it's something I have worked on, and that's kind of why I'm speculating in that direction. Keep in mind that March of 2020, there were more rumors of putting a screen on the hinge called an edge screen. So this is something that wasn't just a flash in the pan. They did continue working on this for several years, like 2 or 3 years of known work on this sort of idea. So when the rumors are that Microsoft is doing something screen related that will address complaints about Surface Duo, well, that would actually potentially address 2 complaints, because 1, less interrupted when spanned, and 2, you wrap the screen all the way around, maybe you've got a cover display here with notifications. How well would that work? I don't know, but maybe. So yes, my video was wild speculation. It was meant to be fun, okay? So like, for those of you that are commenting things like this, asking me to stop giving unsubstantiated gossip and more real news, I told you up front it was wild speculation, even though there is actual evidence that I may be onto something here. So just a pro tip for next time for, you know, some of our friends here. If you pop into a video where I'm clearly just trying to be entertaining and I'm having a good time and I'm enjoying speculating about Duo 2, especially if it's a video that has, I don't know, 120 likes and 1 dislike. If you're the 1 dislike, maybe step back and think about how you're looking at the world. Maybe you're the one who's in the wrong here. So guys, that's all the news I have for you today. Be sure to check back every Monday and Friday for the next news radar. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.